this is going to be a hands-on webinar. So I'm going to introduce AI and generative AI. I'm sure some of you have played with it. So we are going to do a lot of these exercises on Google's Gemini, which is Google's AI. So we are going to look at what are tasks that generative AI is good at, how do we prompt, and so it will be great if you can if you're not in front of your computers, it would be good to be in front of your computers. And then we'll end with some of the limitations of generative AI and some pillars of concern, if you will, right? So let's get started. So DeepDive Labs is going to conduct what is called the first Trailblazer Bootcamp. The reason why it's called a Trailblazer Boost Camp is because it's sort of meant as a way to look at learning from a different perspective. So not just because we do consume learning, but sometimes practicing of it, also we need some accountability partners along the way. So this Trailblazer Bootcamp is a 5-week program starting next Monday, and it runs for 5 weeks. So there are two components to it. So there is an asynchronous learning component where you will have recorded videos released every Monday by Monday afternoon. So typically about an hour every week. And then there will be a synchronous learning work class, which is very similar to what you're attending today, an online class where you can jump in and sort of talk about what you've tried and what were some of the experiments, etc. So just to get the dates correctly, so this live class will be on every Thursday, 5 to 6 p.m. SGT. So the Thursdays will be 21st, 28th, 5th, 12th, and 19th of December. So there will be a certificate or participation that will be given once you've sort of completed about 80% of your discussions and live classes. So what to expect from this Trailblazer Bootcamp, right? So I'll probably start by starting with a quote which sort of resonates very, very deeply with my philosophy of learning. So this is a quote from Andrej Karpathy, who is co-founder of OpenAI. You might have heard of Sam Altman, but Andrej Karpathy is with OpenAI as well. So he says learning is not supposed to be fun, because his premise being today, learning has become a TikTok video. It's like a 1-second reel, right? So long form learning we are expected as educators to sort of crunch in and make it more of an entertainment. So he says it doesn't have to be actively not fun either, right? But the primary feeling should be that of effort. So you should have the mental equivalent of sweating, right? So I think of myself, as I said before, as a technologist, right? So, and I work closely now in the generative AI technology. So this bootcamp is more, as you can see in the Venn diagram, how as early adopters, as educators, right? Because just in this last year, in 2024, I've sat in multiple meetings where institutions are talking about how do we have policies, or how do we come up with policies on how we should let students use GenAI. So this is becoming a tool that we can no longer escape, right? So, and as educators, we should put ourselves in the front so that we are able to use it and also make our classes sort of interesting. So this bootcamp is coming from a point of view of all my experiments that I have performed in the last year, right? Some of them as experiments, and bringing that as ideas to you so that you can also add on to it and take it to your classrooms. So what to expect is we'll do a little bit of deep dive into what is called large language models. So this is the actual technology that powers platforms like ChatGPT or Gemini. So most of it will also have a lot of hands-on activity. So you'll be practicing what are called prompts, right? So how do we talk to AI to get our job done? I'll also be introducing a lot of generative AI tools in the education space, like how do we do audio, video making, etc. But we are not going to go into mastering them itself, right? So we are sort of looking at, so the whole reason why I wanted to bring this slide is to showcase when I started using generative AI, I sort of tried it the initial days sometime late 2023, where I was trying to do very complex things like, hey, can't I create PPT, right, for my class? But it fails miserably, right? So, but then after that, I sort of started breaking down my task to make it a little bit more like piecewise sort of task. So that's what we are going to see in every week. And of course, the office hours are for you to explore. So the content of the week, you can look at what's something that you can add on, or how we can change it, or if you have a specific task that you want to achieve, I'm happy to help you, right? So that's how the Trailblazer Bootcamp itself is designed. This is going to be a quick walkthrough of what we are going to see in the weekly course, right? The initial day week will be on AI technology and evolution, because knowing the history also helps us to understand how the models keep changing. Week 2, we'll talk about a subset of AI called natural language processing, short is NLP. So knowing that helps us to do better prompting, right? All of this, no programming knowledge is expected. It's just come with an experimental mindset, right? Third week, we are going to talk about image creation, more so charts and images. Third week, how do we integrate generative AI tools into lesson planning and content creation, where we'll do a little bit of automation. All right. And final week, which everybody is talking about, how can we do generative AI sort of for evaluating, all right? Evaluating some of the submissions as an assessment tool using techniques which are called as a judge. Right. So this is going to be the overall structure. So this is to give you a context of, so some of this you're going to experience today so that you will get sort of trailer to the course itself. So yeah, whether any questions per se, feel free to use the chat to ask away. I'll just pause here to take if there are any questions. All right, I don't see any, so I'm going to go on. Right. So yes, so now we shift gear to what you're all here for, right? The webinar itself. So yeah, so I would like to start by doing a very, very simple poll. If you can all go into Slido and answer this question. What does the term artificial intelligence mean to you? I'd like to wait for a couple of responses at least, or if you're not in front of a computer, then that's fine. You can just put it on the chat as well. Okay, it's a tool. Yeah, that's true. Computers to perform tasks. Less thinking. Okay. A bot. Yeah, that's the first encounter we tend to have with generative AI, right? Robotics and algorithm. Yes, that's AI too. Imitation of what humans can do. Yeah, faster computation. That's so true. So this word sort of keeps coming up, right? Tool, automation, right? Doing it faster. So generative AI, typically we think of AI or generative AI, which is a subset of AI, in two kinds of tasks. One is called augmentation, the other is automation, right? So today we are going to see a lot more of augmentation, right? And then because for automation to truly automate, we also need a little bit of programming, which again, we can use GenAI as a tool to do that as well. All right. So that sort of uh, gives us the ability to do that. So I'm glad it's sort of the same sort of words resonate, right? Automation is how do we do the same task without our supervision really, right? And then augmentation is how do we sort of do the task better in some way. So let me do a very quick 2-minute intro to AI. So AI is essentially a branch of computer science that focuses on techniques that enable computer systems to mimic human behavior or intelligence, right? So human intelligence again is not very well-defined thing, because in order to understand human intelligence has multiple facets to it, right? So what are some of the tasks we as humans do? We learn from examples, right? So we are able to recognize people's faces by just looking at them once, and then of course a few times we look at it. So learning from examples we are able to do. So the ability of computers to do that is called supervised learning, where we sort of feed your computer some examples so that they are able to learn the behavior from it. The other very important thing is we have our own communication language, right? That's, of course, we have a lot more languages, but starting with English to start off with. So understanding natural language, right? So how do we get computers to understand what we are saying? Else we need to have like a specific language to talk to it, right? Until recently, about 2 years back, you can only talk to computers if you know how to code, right? But that has changed drastically. Recognizing patterns. So this again in the computer science term is called pattern recognition. Where do we need to recognize patterns? This is where most of our recommendation systems are all working, right? It recognizes patterns in our watch and recommend videos to us, etc. And then finally, making decisions in complex situations. This is a little tricky, so I'm going to give you an example in the next slide, right? So how does artificial intelligence essentially work, right? So it's basically a combination of algorithms, data, and a whole lot of computational power. So all of these three things have to come together in order to enable computers to mimic human intelligence, right? So AI systems can analyze vast amount of information, changing circumstances, and improve their performance over time. So just like humans, as we do our jobs daily, we sort of get good at it. There are, of course, numerous applications across industries. So I'm going to now just take a quick look at how human decisions are. So we are the original AI, right? So we are not the artificial AI. So how do we distinguish between human decisions and AI? So human decisions, also in literature, it's called expert systems, right? So typically experts create rules. So sometimes we don't sit down to create our rules, right? But we sort of create it by just observing the real world. For example, if I'm going to ask you a very simple question like how long does it take you to get to work, you would all be able to tell me, right? Because you know, like you have done it for several this thing, you might be able to even say like, hey, on a rainy day how long it takes versus on a dry day versus different modes of transport. So we don't really need a Google map because it's something that we do day in and day out. So humans are intuitive, so we are able to get our patterns, right? But one of the key limitations of sort of human intelligence sometimes is we are unable to process a lot of relationships. Especially, it is said we are unable to process more than 6 variables at a time, right? So we tend to approximate a lot more because we don't look at, hey, is any road disruption going to cause it? Am I going to look at, am I going to beat a friend or any of these things, right? That's where AI systems come in or machines come in. So in AI system, there is a step called the training where we use data. So think of one way to sort of think of this is the equivalent of AI is your Google Maps, right? So Google has tons and tons of data, so which they have used to train the AI system to come up with a bunch of rules, right? So depending on the time of the day you leave, depending on which mode of transport, depending on which point to which point, so many things. Now, if we are able to answer more generic questions like how long does it take to get from point A to point B, so using the trained rules, right? So after the training has happened, which is what Google does, it's able to give us an answer. So one of the key things to observe here is these answers are typically what we call an estimate. It's an approximation, right? So the good thing about these AI systems are they are able to process relationship between tens and thousands of variables, right? And then, so think of the same thing. For example, another example that you can relate to is, so let's say you want to have an estimate, you're putting your house to, you're going to sell your house. And typically what happens in an expert system is the realtor typically comes in, appraises the house, looks at the location, looks at what are the neighborhood square feet prices, quality of things, and then gives you an estimate. So that's how it was happening, right? But now with a lot of data, in the sense that we are able to get information about different properties of the house, right? Not just the square feet, but the quality, which floor it is in, the location, distance to the nearest school, distance to the nearest gym, so on and so forth. And also some of these property sites do have the examples. When they have tried to sell a house through the site, they are able to gather data, right, on what was the price of these houses that got sold. So they can come up with these rules. So there can be like hundreds of variables that machine can crunch, which humans may not, because we tend to approximate a lot less, right? So these rules, the good thing about the AI systems are, as the data changes, right, the rules can also keep changing, because one thing that humans find it hard to change sometimes is our beliefs. We may not be able to pick the market trends as quickly, right? Whereas machines will be able to pick. So if you are able to feed more recent data, so we'll have a new set of rules which we are able to use and sort of predict market trends, right? So the rules follows the data. So of course, because it's sort of dependent on the data, it is also biased on the data. So if you are only giving data of houses which are less than 1 million, for example, then the rules tend to work well with houses which are less than 1 million. But it's not affected by human bias, right? Because humans tend to have a lot more bias in terms of how the market really is. So this is to give you a sense of how now organizations or the world is looking at data-driven way of decision making, right? This is one kind of decision making. So very quickly, I'm going to just show, so I'll probably, so to have a slightly deeper look into Google Maps itself. So one of the data-driven systems we use day in and day out is Google systems. So what's the output? So the output is estimating the travel time, right? And the input, or what we call sometimes the variables of feature, is we have point A, point B, right? The mode of transport, the time of the day, the location, etc. Right? So what Google, the AI system rules that are learned are also technically called models. So model is essentially a mathematical formula that connects the input to the output. So these are the inputs. So given these, so if you are able to train it with a lot of examples, right? Because Google sort of has all these examples because they have your GPS. They know how long it's taken for you to go from point A to point B. They have a lot of historical data. So that's why they are able to find a mathematical formula that will be able to connect the input to the output. That's why we are able to get an estimate, right? So a simple thing could be estimate time is equal to just the kilometer distance between A and B into 3 minutes if it's like your transport is car or this thing. So one of the key things to remember in any model which connects the input to the output is it's never exact, right? Because the model is sort of an approximation of the data. So it's an average of the data, right? So that's something we always use this quote often in AI space, which is called all models are wrong, but some are useful, because it still helps you to make the decision of how this thing you need to take time to get to the place. So now let's look a little bit deeper into what are the types of AI. We sort of looked at AI, an example of AI, and what are the types of AI. So AI, till until recently, most of the AI was narrow AI. So it was trained to do very specific tasks, right? So for example, your virtual assistants like Alexa or Siri, right? So they were expected to answer certain kind of questions, or probably connect to certain kind of devices to switch it on, switch it off. Your recommendation system in Netflix, right? So they were trained to do very specific tasks. So something that we use day in and day out, your spam filters, right, on the email, they were trained to do a specific task, right? And then, of course, your autonomous vehicle, it's, of course, still in the making, but it's sort of helping the computers to do a very specific task. So now, so that we call it narrow AI because it operates within a limited context and doesn't possess general intelligence. Where things changed is once we got good at creating multiple narrow AIs, what changed was people started thinking about, hey, how about we create an AGI, artificial general intelligence, right? So what we have today, or what we call GenAI today, the ChatGPT or Google Gemini, are essentially artificial general intelligence AI system with human-like cognitive ability capable of understanding, learning, and performing any intellectual task. So although it's artificial general intelligence, it's no close to human intelligence, right? So true general AI as of today does not exist. All right. But we are in the process of getting to that because that's what we want to do so that we'll be able to sort of have a good assistant who's able to do what we were capable of doing. So in that context, so now that we have seen narrow general AI, so generative AI is a subset of general AI, right? So general AI is sort of the vision that we want, right? So generative AI is a subset of that capable of generating content. So it could be text, it could be images or any other data, even numbers, right? Often in response to what are called prompts. So these generative models, so also later we'll talk slightly deeper about them, are called large language models because one of the key things about a generative model or a general AI is it should be capable of communicating with humans, right? Else it's not really useful. So it should understand natural language. So it's able to learn how we communicate to each other. So it's able to understand patterns and structure of language, right? And generate new data that has similar characteristics. So some examples again, so a lower, narrower side of it was your autocomplete or Grammarly kind of applications. But then today you also have examples which are like your ChatGPT, which is able to do much, much stronger things. And on the image side, like there is a cool website you can go and look at. It's called This Person Does Not Exist. So because these machines have been trained on millions of human images, it's able to understand these patterns of our facial features. Right. So it's able to sort of, I'll probably very quickly. So this is image of person who actually doesn't exist in the world. Right. So it's able to create by just you learning from patterns. Right. So the kind of what we call the model that is being used to create these change on and off. So now that we have sort of gotten a brief introduction to AI, narrow and general AI, and then generative AI, right? So let me quickly introduce all of these platforms. This is so that everybody is on the same page while we get to do our hands-on activity, right? Generative AI platform, of course, used to be what is called under the natural language processing space, but the company that's caught of make it very, very popular is OpenAI, right? So ChatGPT is what everybody talks about. So the latest version, so every of it has a this thing. So most of these interfaces are very, very similar, right? So I'm just going to show you the interface so that we can see it. So most of it has like a chat interface, right? Here, of course, in ChatGPT, I have what is a paid model. So I have access to ChatGPT 4, right? But then most of you should be able to see the open model that's available on the free version is 3.5. So as you can see, each of these models also keep changing, right? So what I'll tell you what keeps changing in just a bit, right? So they keep creating because, so as you can see, It's great for most tasks or collaborate on writing and code, right? So now having generative AI create code is a very, very popular use case as well. So this is your ChatGPT. This is created by OpenAI, which is heavily, so I think very heavily invested by Microsoft. So that is what you also get when you do your Bing search, etc. Right? So what we are going to use today is Gemini. Gemini is Google's uh, GenAI, right? So here I have just the free version. So I have what is called 1.5 Flash, right? So I'll talk about some of the characteristic of these models in just a bit, right? So we can it's basically a chat interface. Another very popular GenAI platform, which because most of OpenAI and generative AI on Gemini sort of didn't have a lot of responsible AI framework, right? So they were initially trying to answer all kinds of questions, right? Something as simple as tell me a joke is fine, but then people were also using it to do a lot of harmful things, right? But today, all of these models are having a lot of safe measures. But one of the other models, which sort of has what is called a responsible AI framework within, is called Claude. Claude is another, so this is again, all of these models, you can just sign up for it using your email ID, right? So yeah, so this is from a company called Anthropic. So they sort of started because OpenAI was becoming very famous, but people didn't necessarily, the answers that it was giving were not in a very responsible AI format because they were using a lot of copyright data to train the systems, etc. So Claude was sort of set with very specific responsible AI objectives, and it's set to do very well, more so in the research space, right? So you will see more of ChatGPT in the general public, but Claude, Anthropic's Claude is being used a lot more in enterprises and research space. So the first question, of course, there is a whole lot of other GenAI platforms as well. But the first question that always tends to come up when we talk about, hey, which is a best platform to use, right? So every platform is today being very competitive of each other. So they are sort of outdoing each other's model. So it's great to just start off with a free model to start off with. And then based on the use, you can think of buying a paid model typically generates better output data. So we'll talk about once we see this thing, we can look at it. So then how do we compare, right? So anything on the market, it's good to know how do we know which is a better model. So there are a whole lot of, previously it was all narrow AI. So we had like very clear benchmark data sets to compare. Hey, how did one model do better than the other in a recommendation system? Or how did one model do better than the other in a classification model, etc. Right? To separate spams and not spam. But what sort of changed is now people are using generative AI to do a whole variety of tasks, right? So that's why we have what is called multiple leaderboard. One of the very common leaderboard is called the Chatbot Arena LLM leaderboard. So this is basically a community driven evaluation of LLMs and AI chatbot. So it has both benchmark data set against which the responses are compared, but there are also human evaluators who sort of compare, right? So here I just wanted to show this to you, right? So currently the ChatGPT 4.0 is sort of the leading one in this thing. So you can see which organization and of course proprietary. Yes, so this is another thing. We'll talk a little bit more detail about it in a while. So this is what is called a knowledge cutoff. So typically internet data is being used to train the large language model, right? So they have to cut off somewhere to create the data, right? So ChatGPT 4.0, the last sort of information it has is October 2023. Right? Some of them are known, but some of them are not known, right? So Gemini 1.5, the free model is called Flash, right? There is one more which is called 1.5 Pro. So every company tends to have a few different models. So most of these Gemini, ChatGPT, which is OpenAI's model, are all proprietary. Whereas there are also models which are called open source models, which are people have released the whole model to the public so that they can experiment, right? So these are, one example is called a Llama 3 model. So there are so many of these models. So this is to just give you a peek at, hey, if you are sort of interested in the space to also look at it. But that's not the aim of this webinar itself, but to at least I wanted to give a glance of. So GenAI is, although sometimes synonymously used with the term ChatGPT, it is not only ChatGPT, right? GenAI is a much, much bigger space. People are trying to do multiple things, right, in that space. And there are a lot of models which are aimed at sort of creating this artificial general intelligence. So I just wanted to get a sense of which GenAI platform have you used, just to get a sense of which one is more popular per se. If you all can just give me a quick poll, that would be great. Answer the poll. Okay. So yeah, and I think ChatGPT tends to be the most popular one. They have a great marketing team, no doubt. Any of you heard of GitHub Copilot? I know it's more on the coding aspect. I'm curious, others, if you can just type on the chat, what are some
I
of the
just
other
wanted to
AI?
interject. There have been a few people who have joined us a bit late as well. Hey
Oh, okay.
everyone, my name is Vidya Raman and I'm the coordinator here. You can see the Google Genie chat button on the right. You can click on that and you can type in your questions in the chat. If you would like, you can also click on the smiley face icon in the controls and you can raise your hand. I will be able to see that and I will be able to take any questions as well. Um, During these interludes, you are welcome to unmute yourself and also ask any questions should you wish to. Thank you. Back to you, Divya.
Cool. Thank you. All right. So looks like ChatGPT is sort of the clear winner here. But in this webinar, we are sort of going to go into using Google Gemini for a few reasons. Because Gemini with a Google account, it sort of helps you integrate very well with your Google Drive, Google Meet, etc. So that's the plan for this session. So let's take, in case you haven't signed up for Google Gemini, if we can, I'm just going to give them the URL. So if you can just all sign up into Google Gemini, that would be great. All right. And of course, all of these ChatGPT or Google Gemini do have a mobile app as well. So they do fairly good speech to text interactions. So that's something that you can use. So I'll just give a couple of minutes to get everybody on to Google Gemini. So if anybody is having a problem, please do let me know so that I can help you out. So once you sign up, this is the interface you should see, right? So, and then you can, yeah, at one point. So the reason why we typically sign up, so just to give you, while people are signing up into Google Gemini, it's sort of, if I look at ChatGPT itself, right, you can use it without signing up, but your history doesn't get saved. All right, so it's good to sign up so that you can go back and see what some of the experiments you have done, etc. So yeah, let's start with, let's see. What do you call a lazy kangaroo? A pouch potato. All right, so did anybody have any problems getting into Gemini? Just wondering. Of course, some of these you can also, if you already have a ChatGPT system, you can try it out in that as well. But I felt here, at least in Singapore, most of the schools tend to have a Gmail account, so it's good to use Gemini. So the free version, so you can create new chats. Typically, that is what is called the memory of your this thing. So it sort of keeps the memory of the whole chat. So if you are trying to change topic, it's a good idea to just create a new chat. Of course, I can also use the microphone, or in the free version of Gemini, you can't upload a PDF, right? But you can sort of upload an image. Okay. Any questions at this point? So now let's move on to what you're all here for, right? So prompts. So now it's become as easy as just writing English into when you're talking to a computer. So that is essentially a prompt, what you write into your chat box, right? So it's a text that you provide to the language model. So there is a language model that is powering the response to initiate a relevant response. So it could be a guiding question, set of instruction, or just a paragraph of text or an image, right? So the prompt directs the model to search through its learned knowledge or learned rules to generate a response. So the quality of the prompt will affect the quality of the response. So let's start by looking at some prompt examples. So I'm just going to do a quick walkthrough of this, and then we will go on to play around with it as well. So yeah, tell me a joke that I can use as an opening for my class. So if you want to develop a 5-minute warm-up activity for a particular subject, right? So you can try that out. Or if you want to create like a summary or explain a concept to a 12-year-old child, that's something you can do. If you're sort of summarizing, trying to find title for an article, right, for your comprehension, you can summarize. Compare like the key points in 2 articles, right? And what are the pros and cons for a particular method. I'm just going to switch and show you a few examples of what I tried earlier so that I can. Okay, so yeah. So because I've saved some of it, I'm not going to sort of type out everything. So yeah, you can see that I just asked it to the same prompt that you saw. So it sort of does a repeat of some of the jokes, right? So we can always ask it for another one. So this is something I just developed very quickly, a 5-minute warm-up activity for a Tamil class. I saw, I think, 1 or 2 of the people who registered for this class were Tamil teachers. So I just thought, right? So it sort of gives you very clear this thing, right? Because it understands, hey, it's for a class and it's a warm-up activity, right? So it talks about the material, the objective, the material, and what's the procedure, right? So some greeting and then some tongue twisters and then word association, quick quiz, etc. So then I went on to ask one of the other template, a summary of a historical event. So this is what I wanted to sort of showcase as well. So I wanted to, because I think I tried it on the day Trump won. So I just asked it like, hey, can you give me a summary of Trump's second victory as US president? Right. So previously, most models used to do what is called hallucination, right? It used to pretend event happened and then it used to give some response. But a lot of safety factors have gone into most of these mature models. So today it sort of tells you like it can't help with a response, right? So please go ahead and use Google search. So I then went on to try something local in Singapore, right? Singapore changing its time zone. So over a period of time, Singapore has had several time zones, right? From British colonial times to Japanese occupation. But then from 1981, it's sort of the Malaysian Standard Time and Singapore followed suit to maintain convenience, right? And this change resulted in adopting your Singapore Standard Time, which is 8 hours ahead of USD. So I just asked it for a 3-point summary, right? So these are things you can try out as well. So this is to just showcase what are some of the prompts that you can put in, right? So let's quickly try activity. I think the next one is an activity for all of you. So let's do a very quick warm up. So let's create like a lesson plan or an activity you typically create towards a learning objective. So just to get this juices flowing, I've put in some examples there, right? So you can make it create like fill in the blanks or in a reenactment script for a history class, etc. So let's take a couple of minutes to do it. I would love to sort of see your prompts on the chat. And yeah, this is also a good place in case you want to ask a question, please unmute yourself.
Siva, you want us to give the proper, you want us to prompt the Gemini and get this formative assessment and re-interact script? So you want us to
Yeah,
prompt and get it derived?
yes, correct. So you can just submit the prompt itself or you can change the prompt, right? So to sort of get to what you would typically use for your class. So I've just given some example. So I haven't given a lot of specifics. So so that's what we are sort of leading into. Yeah. So a prompt that would give you like a formative assessment. Yeah, that's right. Okay. So we Wesley giving us this. So let's see what happens on my chat while we wait for the rest of them. Worksheet. Okay, on transformation. Is this typically close to what you would like, Wesley? So because it's a worksheet, it's sort of given the template name and date, right? Yeah, okay, cool. It's fine. Okay. All right. Kavita says list 5 questions for an introductory class on deep learning. Great. Okay. Yeah. For printing, right? So that's something we are going to sort of see next as well. So it's great that you sort of gave this prompt. So yeah, we have Stacy who has tried out. So for those who, if you want to share your chat, you can actually go and click on this share, right? And then share, create a public link and then share, right? So that's another way to sort of share within the interface. That is also cool in Gemini. And then it also, we'll see a few others as we go along, right? So very quickly, I'll just showcase what. So there is an open-ended question for secondary one geography students, adaptation of mangroves. Okay, so it's given the question, the answer, and a marking scheme. Okay, so is this close to what you had wanted, Stacy? I wonder. Oh, all right, cool. Okay, so let's then get to do a little bit more enhanced prompting, right? So yes, please continue to try and continue to this thing. I'm just keeping a watch on time, so I'm going to proceed on. So what is generative AI good for, right? It's actually good for writing content, right? Writing your blogs, report, article. It's very good for analyzing and working with documents, analyzing data, right? And a whole lot of idea generation. So I use it a lot for idea generation and then of course working with documents, right? So what sort of makes a good prompt, right? So a prompt, the more information you give it, right? The more, so we talk about what is called the 4 C's to make a good prompt. It needs to be clear, right? So a lot of these language that you have used in it, very, very specific to educator space, right? But you can still see it sort of understands Cambridge, it understands the level that people are talking about, etc. Right? So all of those is, we'll talk about because of the way it's being trained. So it's clear and give enough details, right? But not to over explain, right? And then again, as I think I feel sometimes as Asians, that's something we tend to do quite often. Can you please give me something, right? That's something that I do very often. But it's better we just say create something, right? Not that it's nothing wrong in being polite, but you don't have to. So we can skip the please, etc., and say just list. And very importantly, context information, right? So provide relevant background information. So that's where I think your geography one or your Cambridge, which level of your math, all of these sort of makes very interesting the thing. So there is a whole lot of prompt template that people typically use. If you Google, you will find quite a lot. So one of the popular prompt template, or the one that I tend to use a lot, which is sort of derived from a more complex one, is roast, right? So it's important to always, before we tell what task we want to do, right? Because typically when we talk about a task, we tend to think that, hey, we just wanted to write an article, right? But the more contextual information you give it, right? So who are you, right? For what purpose you want to write the article? You want to write an article for which audience, right? So that's where I feel this template roast has very, very, it's sort of easy to remember, right? So you write your role, secondary school teacher in Singapore, what's your learning objective? To have students learn about what they should do when they encounter cyberbullying incident, who's the audience, situation if you want to add on, right? Which class is it for? It's a class on cyberbullying, and create. So what we want to create sort of comes last. So one of the key things about prompting is you want to put the task to the end so that you will have a lot more context, right? So the prompt gives all the context, and you always start with the role and audience at least, right? That will always give a better result. So think of this, right? And try to sort of recreate whatever you created using the roast template and see if it sort of helps. Very quick activity. Yeah. So feel free to share your prompts. All right, I will. Oh, sure, sure. Yeah. Just give me a second. Yeah. So yes, I'm going to leave the roast explanation on the screen for all of you to try. So one way is to just give it the way it's shown here, like role, object, audience, situation, or you can write it as a sentence which has all of this information in it as well. I don't see a lot of difference between the two. I'll show you some examples, but yeah, I would love for all of you to try. Are these fairly similar, or were you able to get a slightly better? So while you work on it, yeah, I'll probably give another minute and then showcase. Okay, so I've just sort of used it slightly differently, the prompt that you see on the screen, right? So I've asked for 3 role play scripts of 1 minute each. So the more information you give it, right, very close to what you want, right? So all of these information, minute things like 1 minute, all of that also sort of gets into consideration, right? So it sort of lists the character, and then so one from a point of view of the bystander, and then the other one is on the concept of the victim, the other is from a bystander as well. So after you read it, I sort of went ahead and said, elaborate role play script 3 into a 4 minute skit, right? So it's the first thing it says is classroom setting. Well, the bully is sending mean messages to another student, right? Hey, that's not cool. Stop it. Or mind your own business, right? Cyberbullying is wrong. It hurts people. You shouldn't do that. So if I want to sort of expand it, then it sort of tells me, adds a little bit more to the scene, right? Looking distressed, a whole lot of information. So these are ways in which you can start at a point and then start making it a little bit more elaborate, right? So pick one option that comes out and then play more around it. Cool. I have, Wesley has sort of, okay, trigonometric equation. So this is a lesson plan, IGCSE, mathematics class. Yeah, 1 hour period, right? So it sort of also gives you these timing on it. Great. Any questions at this point? All right, I'm going to proceed on. All right. So very quickly, what's the difference between Google Gemini versus Google Search? Right. What Google Search essentially gives you is a set of links. Right. It's not able to. So if you ask the same question, like create 5 MCQ with 4 options each, test to for a grammar, it's only going to give you the links which has these keywords, Gemini, right? MCQ, etc. Whereas what your generative AI is able to give is it's able to generate new words. So it's sort of a very, very different use case. The reason why I brought it up is to sort of see how different they are. So essentially, both do have some sort of AI, right? So Google Gemini is powered by what's called a large language model, whereas Google Search is powered by information retrieval and page ranking, because the more, so there again, some sort of AI is used because the more popular pages, right, tends to get shown first. So how you interact with it, large paragraph with context, right? Whereas Google Search is just 1 to 2 sentences. And your Google search gives you like either, like if you ask something like who's Donald Trump or something, you usually get like a card, either gets direct answers, relevant links. Whereas what you get in a large language model is synthesized information from the language base, right? Web that it responds in natural language. So how does it do that? So very, very quickly, just a 2-minute look into this, because I have one more activity which I wanted to show before we sort of close this. So generative AI is powered by what are called large language models. The reason why it's called large is because a large amount of corpus of text, the whole of internet really, is used to train. So in a minute, I'll tell you how it's trained, right? And a large amount of compute power is used. And the kind of function or the model it creates is like this complex model between an input text and output text you're giving, right? So it's, of course, it's trained on language data. So that's the language part. And the model, because it takes as input the text you are giving and it's giving you an output back, right? So what is happening under the hood is it is essentially a very, very simple model. So if you look at, so how you sort of take the entire internet, right? And you sort of make it predict the next word. So your model is made to predict from the past. So if you give nothing, it predicts if. If you say nothing is, it predicts impossible. You sort of teach the machine, right, with examples. So what are these examples? It's trained to predict the next word, right? So for example, this simple sentence, the promise of large language model is that they, and then you will get, if once you're training it on a whole corpus of text, what happens is it gives you the topmost word, which is the most commonly occurring word in this context, right? Because we have trained it on, think of it, it's like gigabytes of data from the internet. So it's sort of learned the rules. It's able to give you what is called this probability, right? Hey, the next word is can with a very high chance of 62, will, and so on and so forth. But if you do this, what happens is if you just have predict the next word, then most of the responses tends to become very, very similar, right? Because most times you have a word with a very high probability. So what typically happens in a large language model, the first step, right, is the self-supervised learning, which is predicting the next word, right? So for example, this flash flood watch will be in effect all night. So it's able to predict that. So on top of that language model, there is something called the supervised learning, that is this thing, which is where it's able to learn a very specific task. Most times it is able to learn what is a question answer task. So given a question, who are the key people mentioned in a particular article, it's able to tell who the person are, right? So by doing supervised learning, it gets good at, so typically in a large language model, it's been trained to do multiple tasks. not just question and answer, but also a bunch of what we call classifications and entity recognition and things like that. We'll sort of go a little bit deeper in it in the course, but in the want of time, sort of giving you a very brief overview. And then finally, the response should be something that humans like, right? So that's where it sort of takes into account human preferences. So if you look at Gemini itself, you can sort of put a thumbs up or thumbs down, right? So, hey, whether this is a good response or a bad response, all of this goes into creating better responses, right? So the last part of your model is essentially aimed at sort of making the output very similar to what you want, right? So by giving the feedback, we are able to get better responses, right? So that is something that actually is inbuilt inside your training LLMs. So how do LLMs really respond? So you give it the prompt. So once you give it the prompt, it sort of tokenizes. Think of tokens as just one word each, right? So it sort of splits it into words. Then it does something called encoding, because word in and of itself, computers don't understand. It turns it into numbers. So for now, we'll take it at the face value. And then using these numbers, because it has this gigantic model, right? So it's able to create new numbers. So then it outputs one word at a time. So when you are sort of generating, right, it typically generates like one word at a time. So because it's sort of predicting one word and then using that to predict the next, and so on and so forth, right? So how does it create that? That's because it's learned a lot of these structures, right? So now, in the sort of want of time, I'm going to skip this, but the reason why I bring this up is, so if you want to create multiple choice questions, right? You can create multiple choice questions. I often, in one of the courses I teach, we have multiple answers. So it's a multiple option answers I need to have. That is also something you can create, right? So one of the key things why I wanted to bring this up was the whole idea of language model is it's actually predicting one word at a time. It's predicting language, and it's very good at predicting language. So one thing that especially the math teachers in the cohort should realize is, technically your language model is not meant to be good at logic. Okay, so that's something to keep in mind. Although so I had some cases of the past which I sort of lost. So earlier, like at least even 6 months back, if you are trying to create math MCQ question, right, using fractions or things, more like at least 2 out of the 5 questions were incorrect, right? Because it didn't necessarily build logic into it. But today, there are advanced prompting techniques called chain of thought prompting, which sort of makes the machine, before it gives out something, right? It sort of helps it to think step by step as well. So it's sort of built into the model now based on the reinforcement part that we talked about, right? Because people kept saying, hey, you've given a bad response. So it sort of learned the logic by breaking down the multiple ways, right? So this is something you want to keep into this thing. Of course, as models become more and more better, this thing, right? So they tend to do better in logic, but always like, don't use the questions directly. Please use it with like this thing of salt, so that you sort of read it before you can give it as a worksheet to your students. So the last activity I thought I wanted to showcase, right, is graph, right? So we sort of worked a lot on the text modality, but generative AI is also capable of creating a whole lot of charts. So of course, we are all aware of these multiple charts, bar, line charts, scatter plot, etc. So I'm just going to go through one of the examples. So let me Okay. So I think earlier one of you did want to, because some of it were from YouTube shorts and things like that, right? So something, of course, here I've not used the roast technique really. So here I've just created to just showcase. So you want to create a graph showing different social media platform and the amount of time teenagers spend on it. Right. So all of these, I'll include it in the presentation so that you can go and take a look at it as well. Right. So it's created this chart. So the advantage about Google Gemini is, so it sort of created a fairly good chart, right? But it also gives you sort of the disclaimer. It says, be sure to check the data to make sure I got it right? Because we didn't give it any data, but it sort of creates it in chart platform so you can edit the chart. So I can make it like a column chart if I want. So typically these are categorical data. So line chart wouldn't make a lot of sense, right? So I'll just keep it a column chart for now. All right. So that is something that's doable. You just create a chart. So most often your chart comes from data. So I wanted to showcase one more example, which is essentially creating data and then you create a chart, right? So keeping the same theme, so I'm asking it to create synthetic data for 20 students, primary school students in Singapore. Data should have the following columns. So I'm giving it as much information as possible. I'm saying serial number, give me the gender, number of hours a day spent on TV, studying, social media, traveling, and so on. So it's sort of creating the synthetic data. All right. So this is another great way to create synthetic data, especially if you want to use several of these data to create charts, right? So once you have this synthetic data, right, then you can, of course, Google, because of the ecosystem, you can export it as a Google Sheet and then download it as an Excel if you want to showcase it. Here again, these are all these safe techniques that got it added later on. It's saying, hey, this is, be cautioned that it's a synthetic data, actual, this thing may vary significantly, right? So these are all of these safe techniques that Gemini sort of added later. If you had used the same thing like 6 months back, it wasn't there actually. So I've said, go use the data and show the mean hours for male versus female, right? So it's calculated that. So what it's actually doing, right? So because language models typically is meant to predict the next word, right? So that's why it may not be able to do a lot of mathematical logical functions. So what all of these generative AI platform build under the hood, right? They build they sort of invoke certain tools so that you can finish the task. So here, it's sort of, you don't have to know Python. It's actually written a piece of code in Python. It has translated the data in the Google Sheet into what is called these lists, right? And then it's calculated the mean. So the mean is actually correct, right? So in and of itself, language models cannot give you right mathematical answer because it's just generating a number, right? But because of those limitations that existed, it was LLMs now, because it sort of invokes another. So so when you write this prompt, right, under the hood, it sort of it generates the code to calculate the mean, right? Because it's not meant as a way, you can't just use the traditional predict the next word to generate the mean itself. So last I'll just show, then I say, hey, plot it as a bar chart, then it can go ahead, right? And then I say create bar chart to show the mean TV hours, right? So what it does is it goes ahead and creates a mean of the serial number as well, because that's a column that I generated. So it assumed that I wanted all of it, right? And then I am saying that, hey, remove serial number from this graph, and then it's able to create, right? So this is, in the want of time, I didn't have the chance to let you experiment with it, but I'm going to share this link along with the presentation so that you can sort of use it and try out your own example. Right. So I think we sort of have just about 5 minutes. So I wanted to probably talk about two things, and then I will come back to this question. Right. So yeah, so I also don't want to paint this rosy picture, right? So there is quite a lot of limitations of LLMs as well. So one of the key things is what is called hallucination, which is essentially fabricating fact. So if you ask about it sometimes, it will not be able, it just generates data, right? But a lot of these generative AI platforms today have done some mitigation effect on it, right? So you can't believe every output that it brings. So that's something we want to keep in mind. Again, the blind spot for recent events, we saw that in the case of the Trump election because of knowledge cutoff. So it's actually, they have safe response built in. Oftentimes in LLM, one of the things you will see is repetitive tone. So it also helps to set the tone. So you can say that, hey, make it playful or make it short and succinct. All of these contexts actually makes it a little bit better, especially if you are generating content. So one important thing is it lacks self-awareness, right? So it can't sort of train on themselves. It's still humans who are training the whole system. And yeah, it's poor at math and usual logic tasks. So in the course, we'll talk about slightly more advanced prompting techniques, right? Which you can use to get to the task that you want to. So there are some mitigations for each of these limitations. And finally, things that always, because it's sort of trained on the internet data, it comes with the biases that exist in the data as well, right? So and also the biases of humans who have helped to fine tune. So all of the more we give feedback, right? So it depends on who are the humans who are actually giving feedback. So it's sort of going to tune to there. So that is something you will also see. It's very more Western language driven, right? But you will, so as we sort of start using it more and more, you will realize that it sort of understands your tone and creates the language following up with the tone that you would like. There are certainly privacy concerns because any sort of data, most of the LLMs use a lot of these copyright materials in their this thing. So any data you put into the system prompt, especially in a free version, right, you want to, it will be used for building the next model. Right. So things to keep in mind, which is actually, there were a lot of news. It's, you don't put any personally identifiable information or proprietary information into the prompts, right? So that's something you want to keep in mind. Yeah, with that, I thought I will sort of end by asking, now that you have seen a bit of generative AI at play, I was wondering if you can describe a challenge that you believe Gen AI could help address, to just get the ball rolling before we sort of end today's session. You can use the chat to give me your thoughts. So while we sort of, while you think about this, I wanted to quickly reveal, so that the song that you were listening to at the start of this webinar is created by one of the GenAI tools, which is called suno.ai or suno.com. So I sort of created, so all that I had to give was a prompt, right? So create a groovy song to end the webinar on GenAI Essentials for Teachers. All right, so yeah, so this is the song lyrics that it generated. I just wanted to, yeah, so as tech savvy educators who joined in today, tech savvy educators shine, together we will redefine the space, right? So on that note, I thought I will end. I know it's sort of just on time. So thank you all for coming in.
Ignite the curious fire. GenAI can't be stopped. It's the rhythm that won't stop. Wave the flag and join the ride. Tech and wisdom side by side. From the basics to advance, change the world with just a glance. Tech-savvy educators shine. Together we'll redefine. Grading papers at the speed of light. AI helps to get it right. Tracking progress like a pro. Students' futures start to glow. GenAI can't be stopped. It's the rhythm that side by side.